Hello everybody, today I am driving a 981 generation Porsche Boxster Spyder. Not only is it one of the prettiest cars to come out of Stuttgart in the last 20 years, but on paper it's also one of the most well-rounded, providing an interesting alternative to not just a current generation 911, but also many other sports cars and even the odd old school full-blooded supercar. But can this really hold a candle to not just its contemporaries, but also the mighty Ferrari 360 Moderna? If you've got £70,000 burning a hole in your pocket, that's a decision you may well be faced with, you lucky devil. Today, I'm going to try and see if it really can be that good. The Spyder is a car that I nearly constantly feel sorry for because it's actually been around in one guise or another for quite some time. But with the 981 generation, it became an altogether more serious proposition. Of course, the car that was really making the headlines was the Cayman GT4. For a very long time, Porsche fanatics have been clamoring for the company to give the Cayman the power we all knew it could handle. With the GT4, they finally relented, but they also went one step further by giving it more or less wholesale the front suspension off the 911 GT3. And while it didn't get a full GT spec power plant, it also was given more poke than any other Cayman or Boxster before. And this is where comparisons between the GT4 and the Spyder become quite interesting, because on the one hand you could say the Spyder is clearly the more bespoke affair. The GT4, after all, at a quick glance doesn't really look any different to a tuner special. I've seen a few tech art Caymans that I have mistaken for a GT4. However, this, with its manually operated Spyder roof and its real baby Carrera GT styling, cannot be mistaken for your average Boxster, certainly by a petrol head. But it did not get the same front suspension as the GT4, instead being given the X73 kit. In other words, the sport suspension from a Boxster GTS. This also came from the era where, because Porsche, the Cayman sat above the Boxster, despite the fact that for every other manufacturer, the convertible is always more expensive. And to justify this madness, they always had to make sure that the Cayman was just a little bit more impressively specified. So where that made 395 horsepower, this made 380. A token difference, sure, but annoying nonetheless. Still, you could get many of the same options as in that car, and this particular example is very nicely specified. So it has the absolutely essential 981 bucket seats, plenty of leather and Alcantara inside, red stitching to match the gorgeous Guards red paintwork, a few bits of carbon fibre, and not all that much else. Compared with a lesser Boxster, you got nice beefy brakes, bespoke wheels, different front and rear bumper, of course that gorgeous rear deck, and while the power figure wasn't as generous as in the GT4, it was still more than any other Boxster. Torque is 310 pound-feet, which is 420 Newton-meters. Of more interest to people though were the fact that it came exclusively with a 6-speed manual gearbox. By this time, the 911 had moved on to the 7-speed, which was never as well loved. It also got the quicker steering rack from a 911 Turbo and a sport suspension lowered versus standard by 20mm without Porsche's adaptive suspension management. And all of this means, on paper, this should be one of the sweetest, best balanced sports cars out there for use on British roads. It has just the right amount of power. It's also the lightest Boxster or Cayman of its generation. In fact, it may be one of the lightest Porsches of the last 15 years. These weigh, real world, some 1,350 kilos, which is less than even a base Boxster with no options, still some 30 or 40 kilos lighter than a GT4, and more impressively, some 90 kilos lighter than its direct successor, the 718 Spyder. That is a car which I have driven and in many ways enjoyed. Again, at a quick glance, it doesn't look all that different to this. Unlike most of the rest of the 718 range, that car also kept the 4-litre flat-6 naturally aspirated engine, which is entirely different to the 3.8 here. Unfortunately, by the time the 718 came around, regulations had changed, so the exhaust there was somewhat strangled. The cars don't really sound like anything at all. Not an accusation I can level at these, that's for sure. The other key difference, and where things get particularly interesting, is that that car then was gifted the same suspension as on the GT4. However, in my opinion, that made it, I think, just a little bit too stiff to enjoy. I didn't have much time behind the wheel of one, and what time I did have was courtesy of a lovely Porsche fan, Roger Bailey, who also has a YouTube channel, now a 992 GT3, and if you want some real-world ownership experience, go and check his channel out. Likewise, it would also be remiss of me not to mention Damien over at The Car Guys, because he also has a 718 Spyder and has made some good content on it. In here, it is pretty much familiar 981, which is a very good thing. I think this is one of Porsche's best interiors. Though it isn't particularly flashy, it is a very nice place to spend your time. These bucket seats for me really are an absolutely essential part of the GT4 or Spyder experience, and you could get cars without them. To me, not only do they not look anywhere near as special, they won't feel it either. These seats are still perfectly comfortable. The only real sacrifice is that you can't have them with heating, but they're really supportive and transfer all that more information to you from the chassis. The simple fact is the Spyder is already off to a brilliant start, because the base 981 is already an incredible thing. Even in regular non-S guys, it makes a great sound, looks pretty decent, and is massively usable. In fact, even that hasn't really been compromised all that much. You still have a big fruit, as you would get in the normal car, and at the back where you stow the roof, you've still got a little bit of storage space too. Yes, that roof is a little bit of a faff, but I've seen a few people do it now, and I think with experience it can be done fairly quickly. Maybe if you were trying to use this daily, all year round, it could be a little bit of an issue, but I think for the majority of people considering one of these cars, it's a sacrifice you're likely going to be able to live with. So then, how does it fare on a nice bit of British B-road? Let's see. It's fabulous, absolutely sensational, really does deliver the experience that you'd want from a Porsche. I spent this morning driving another car that belongs to Adam, who owns this. That was a TTS, a Mark II, a car that you can pick up for about a tenth the price of one of these. And with that, I was asking the question, if you were already driving around in a normal regular hatchback, an A1, an A3 or something, would it really feel worth going to something like that? Or should you simply skip the TT and go straight to a Boxster? I actually enjoyed that car a lot more than I thought I was going to. But this shows you how it's meant to be done. The curious thing is that at lower RPM, certainly, it doesn't really feel any quicker than the TT, despite that car having a 130 horsepower deficit. Wind it out though. Oh, and it moves. But more than that, it's got the soundtrack. It's amazing, this thing. Possibly a little bit too raucous, and I do not like the pops. The big problem I've currently got with this car is really no different to that of many other Cayman and Boxsters. It's just geared too long. You have a sensational engine which sounds brilliant and is a joy to rev out. The gearbox, easily one of the nicest, snicketiest things you're ever going to experience. But the car doesn't really give you all that many natural opportunities to use it. Handily, that extra slug of torque that these have over a regular Boxster does really come into play, because it means that you don't have to rev the car out to make progress. But you want to experience that noise, and to give you what you want to hear from me in a video, I've got to use first and second all the time, and that's just annoying. The only other real weakness of the regular 981 is the steering, because for this generation, Porsche moved over from hydraulic to electric assistance. Though in the 911 they eventually fixed things, with the Boxster and Cayman they never really did, and as a result the racks just lacked that interactivity, that feedback, that texture really that some of the earlier cars had. And while it's far from a deal breaker, I also wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention it. Why this car has both Sport and Sport Plus modes, I really honestly don't know. Without adaptive dampers or an automatic gearbox, it seems a little bit pointless. The rev matching, which you get in Sport Plus, is actually very good, though I'm not using it because, honestly, to do it yourself is all the more enjoyable. I do wish the exhaust was just that little bit less raucous. I don't mind it making the noise when you're on the throttle, like that. It's just the excessive pops and cracks that really, for me, are just a bit too much. As you might imagine, visibility is either brilliant or less brilliant, depending on whether the roof is in place or not. Brake feel is very good. Though the ceramics will give you the ultimate stopping power, these steels are still more than adequate. I have been warned that these Michelin Pilot Sport 4s are okay, but past their prime. Even so, you can still carry plenty of speed. The car's got quite a bit of grip. These have a mechanical limited slip differential operated by the Porsche torque vectoring system, so it does some clever stuff, and it works very well. You also got stuff like dynamic gearbox mounts and sport chrono as standard, so Porsche at least chucked you a few things for your money. And how much money are we talking about? Well, when new, these are about £66,000 plus options. You could get that easily up to about 80,000 or maybe a little bit more, particularly if you went for the buckets that were a few £1,000s and the ceramic brakes, which were a lot of £1,000s. The red line here is just over 7,500, and though it isn't a GT3 power plant, if you were to hear it going past, you'd believe it was. These were fairly rare, around 2,500 globally, with just over 200 for the UK market. Because of that, and the fact that they are, well, brilliant, they've held their money very well. In fact, you're likely going to pay more or less the RRP. So to get one of these in decent condition, you would have to spring really for at least 70,000 quid. And it's at that point where, if you were working your way through the classifieds, you might be tempted to just flick over to another search and see what £70,000 would get you if you're willing to go with something a little bit older. And for that money, you could get a very decent example of Ferrari's 360 in either coupe or convertible forms with the F1 gearbox, or even the legendary 6-speed gated manual. Should you though? Is this car really genuinely good enough it'll give you that Ferrari feeling? Well, it's an interesting question. On paper, the two really are quite evenly matched. This makes 380 horsepower, the Ferrari just about 400, so not a massive difference. In torque, this is the clear victor, 310 pound-foot versus the Ferrari's 275. That though does have one of the greatest engines of all time, a flat plane crank V8 with 5 valves per cylinder, and it makes an even better noise than this. Though the F1 box of the era is also not brilliant, if you do want something that will row its own gears, that at least gives you an option, though of course if you want a Porsche with that, get the latest 718. Those though will of course be another 20 or 30,000 pounds. Technically, this is probably the rarer car, though, because the Ferrari is a Ferrari, and you don't see many 360s full stop, but you do see a lot of Boxsters. It's not going to feel that way. Ride comfort, I would actually say they're fairly evenly matched. The dampers here actually do their job. I would say for English roads, this is a much better setup car than the 718. If you want to do more track work, I'd go 718, but for the roads, this has it. The 360 though is also masterfully damped. Unsurprisingly, in terms of running costs, this really is the clear victor. It's better on fuel. This is currently averaging 24.62 the gallon, and that's across 180 miles of motorway and also fast road driving. The Ferrari, meanwhile, would struggle to get 20, well, full stop. Servicing one of these is also going to be considerably less, about half or a third the price, though insurance is unlikely to be anywhere near as different as you think. Trying to guess depreciation would be a fool's errand, but on account of the fact I am a fool, I will try. I would say these are likely to lose a little bit more money over time, but if you buy the wrong Ferrari, that could also hurt you. In that scenario, if you were to buy a super low mile example and then drive it, it's going to cost you a few quid. Not that these, unfortunately, are dramatically different there. Point to point, this is the quicker car, not just in terms of pure outline pace, but also the confidence you have to push on, the overall grip that the chassis not only has, but also communicates to you, and the fact that it's got a lot more electronics in it, so if things do go a little bit pear-shaped, you've got a bit more faith in the car to sort it out. But the Ferrari will massage your ego in a way that just about no Porsche, GT or otherwise can. People go nuts for them, particularly if you buy something older like the 360. The reception you'll get is more often than not a very warm one too. People love them. They're seen now as a classic rather than something people buy simply to be a flash git. This will probably suffer more from that. And ultimately, neither of these are the fastest way to get from A to B for your money. Instead, it's more about the drama, the noise, the looks. And in both cases, there's a great car. The Ferrari, though, is a real, true, proper supercar. And you'd know that every time you stopped at a fuel station. People will flock around it. This, I'm sure, will attract people, certainly petrol heads, but not in anywhere near the same way. For some, that would be a great advantage of it. I would also love to tell you that these are rock solid reliable and 360s are not, but actually many 360s can be pretty decent, but bear in mind they're 20 years old now. They do require maintenance at that age, sometimes a lot of it. However, this car is already on its second gearbox, a well-known failure point apparently. That's proper. That's really proper. Just there, just feel the back end just starting to move. Really, really easy, really safe, really nice. I would not trust some very keen 20-year-old in a 360. In this, sure, they can still get themselves into trouble, but they'll also have a better chance of getting themselves out of it. Though this is the king of storage, the 360 is actually also not as bad as you might imagine, a far more practical car than many give it credit for. This car has seen track use, and having followed a few, they are pretty good. It also went up to the NC500 recently, and for that it is the perfect companion. A very comfortable car, very good over long distances. As you can tell, it's a little bit chilly out today, but I've got my shirt on, not a jacket, and I'm absolutely fine in here. Wind noise, not a problem. Very, very civilized car. Though it's the same width as a regular Boxster, the way it's styled makes it look wider, which is brilliant because it gives it that stance and feel of a proper supercar, but without the width that can sometimes be tricky on the tight roads you do get up in northern Scotland. At this price point and for this type of car, it's very difficult to think of a direct rival. The 360 is one, but perhaps a closer one would be the Lotus Evora in 400, 410 and 430 guises. That didn't come in convertible form, so a Cayman is the more appropriate item to look at there, and I would say I'd have the Lotus over the Porsche, if for nothing else than the rarity and wow factor that the Lotus gets. The Porsche is still a great thing, but I think compromised by that suspension. That's a thrill. That's a real thrill. Fabulous car, this. The windscreen in this also broke, and though that really isn't a reliability issue, what was more frustrating was the fact it took 3 attempts to refit one properly. Nobody, it would seem, could get it quite right, and that would frustrate me. So if you gave me £70,000 and said, choose, what would I have? Actually, I'd probably have this. Yeah, I would. I love the 360 to bits, and for anyone who wanted to use a car less times through the year, that's going to give you the sense of occasion that even this cannot. However, if you like to use your cars on a frequent basis, this is so usable, so much fun. Even in the middle of autumn, heading into winter, puts a smile on my face, this. It really does. And I would use it for another month or two through the year than a 360. If you want some more opinions on what the old Ferrari is like, I made a few videos on those. I'll try and put the link in the description down below. But for now, all I want to say is a huge thank you to Adam for bringing his car out, his friend Andy for helping out today, and of course to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.